Hi everyone, and welcome to the final webinar of National Fertility Awareness Week. Our theme today is Talk Fertility, and we're joined by Stuart Lavery, Consultant in Reproductive Medicine at Aria Fertility and UCLH, for this webinar generously sponsored by Ferring. Today we're going to be talking about some of the barriers to treatment and looking at a survey carried out with Ferring known as the 1000 Dream Survey. We're recording this webinar, so you'll be able to watch it again later. It will be on the webinars page on our website in the next few days. And if you have any questions, please do pop them in the Q&A. We won't read out any names, so any questions you will ask will be anonymous. My name's Sharon Martin. I'm the Business Development Manager for Fertility Network, and really pleased to welcome Stuart, and I'll just hand over to Stuart. Thank you.
Sharon, thank you very much for that kind introduction. And I'm really grateful for the invitation from FN UK to be part of this week. I think it's such an important issue, and as part of the sector, we're just delighted to be involved and to support it. So the work I'm going to present over the next 15 to 20 minutes is all about what makes patients and couples and individuals seek fertility treatment. And in their quest to start a family, what barriers do they meet? What obstacles are in their path to getting and accessing treatment and hopefully having that baby and starting that family? And I think it's a really important issue, because if you look at most fertility research, it's very laboratory based, or it's all about the drugs that we use in a particular type of fertility treatment. And we actually sometimes can forget that there are human beings on the receiving end of all of this. And actually, it's just as important to research the experiences of those human beings so that we can understand what barriers does the system put in their way. And by understanding the barriers, can we remove them? And ultimately, can this sort of work help us improve the care that we actually give to patients? So these are the issues I'm going to be talking about. What do we need to understand about drivers and barriers? I'm going to spend some time talking about the importance of time, because every patient that comes through that door is exquisitely sensitive to the passing of time and how it impacts on potential successful treatment outcome. And yet sometimes I think when they hit the barriers of the conventional sort of healthcare service, they can feel that that time sensitivity can be ignored, and that actually the timetable moves along at the convenience of the clinic and not necessarily the convenience of the patient. So we need to understand what motivates patients. Why are they thinking about starting treatment? What barriers do we put in their way? And what about the human being and their experience of a stressful treatment? How do what we do in the sector as a way of trying to help, can we sometimes impact on a patient's mental health? And can that impact on their relationships with their partners and on the partners themselves? And then finally, I want to think about a few things about what can we do about it? Can we actually think about this seriously, and can we act to actually improve the patient experience? So most of the work I'm going to present today comes from a study called 1000 Dream Study. And it was a literature review to look at all of the research that had been done to this date around this topic. So it wasn't just one country, it wasn't just one study. And it looked at both doctors and nurses within the treatment, it looked at psychologists, and it looked at patient advocates, and it got those together into sort of an expert survey and focus group to try and get an understanding across the whole profession and all the providers about what they felt. And then finally, there was a survey that was online that had informed previous findings, and it collected data from patients who were struggling to have a family and the partners of those patients as well. But bottom line, there was nearly 2,000 patients in 9 countries that participated. So with that amount of data, it's probably very validated and reproducible and transferable across many, many different sectors. So these are just some of the countries involved. You'll see that in the UK, there were 101 patients, 100 partners, so 201 in total out of that 1,944. And obviously, because fertility in having a family is a journey, it's not a static one-off procedure or occurrence, lots of the patients and the partners were at different stages of the treatment. And also, there's all families come in all sorts of shapes and sizes these days. So there were single women, there were married couples, there were heterosexual couples, and there were gay couples that were all involved. So this is the really critical issue. And I must be honest, I was slightly shocked when I understood this data, because I don't think we fully realize in our profession the length of time it potentially takes to process through treatment. But this is what the data is telling us. This is what the patient's real journey is looking at. That actually, while the couples are just out there trying naturally, waiting for a diagnosis, it can take up to 3.2 years. Eventually, when you actually start treatment, it can take more than 2 years just of time spent trying to conceive after a diagnosis of infertility. And then ultimately,
Sorry, everyone. I think we'll just get a slight pause there from Stuart. If anyone's actually, is everyone else experiencing the same? Could somebody put their hand up to see that they've also got a frozen screen? Oh, we're back again. Stuart?
So really the bottom line here is it takes longer to get diagnosed, it gets longer to get into treatment, and then it gets longer to actually have a successful treatment than anybody has really thought. And obviously, because the success rates are related to the age that you finally have treatment at, ultimately by couples and individuals experiencing this timeline, it means that the actual success of treatment when they finally get there is going to be reduced. So this is a critical issue, both in terms of improving patients' experience, but also in terms of improving their results of treatment when they eventually get to a clinic. And this is not unique to any single country. I mean, look, here's the data. The average time to diagnosis in months. In the United Kingdom, it's 40.2. But even in countries with sophisticated fertility healthcare systems, such as the US, it actually took longer. And interestingly, the shortest time to treatment in this study sample was actually in China. But even in China, it took 32 months. And so each country, I think, needs to look at its individual separate circumstances, whether the healthcare is in the private sector or in the government sector or in the insured sector. And I think each country, they really need to look at trying to improve access by reducing time. These are some of the reasons as to why couples are coming on this journey. And the most important one is in people who present as couples, that they actually have an equal desire to want to have a family at the same time. And this is the most commonly reported driver in overall respondents across 5 of the 9 countries. And the results were similar whether we looked at patient groups or partner subgroups. And this is important because anybody who's been in a relationship will understand that sometimes it's quite difficult to be on the same timeline as your partner. But as a couple, there probably isn't anything more that we would embark on as such a joint venture as actually having a family. And so therefore, both parts of that couple have got to want this outcome, and they've got to want it at the same time. You'll see from the second group of columns that sometimes it was all about one respondent wanting to come through and being desperately determined to try anything to be a parent. But the idea of the relationship being in a good position, so having great support
Apologies, everyone. We seem to be having some technical difficulties from Stuart. Not sure if anyone else is experiencing that, but I certainly am at this side. Raise your hand if you're similar. Okay, I'll just give Stuart a few more minutes. I think the technical difficulties align with his connection.
Oh, I think my slides have just gone off. Let me see if I can get them again.
Sorry, we just had a slight technical difficulty there, Stuart, where you actually went, you were frozen there.
Sorry about that. The link must not be good. Can you see the slides at the moment?
No, but I can see you.
Okay, let me see if I can share then again, and let's see how we go. Yeah, I'm going to share my screen again. Right, how's that now? Can you see those slides?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so we've looked at what's driving patients and couples to have treatment. Let's think about some of the barriers. What are the obstacles that people face? Well, across the board, the major barrier was cost. And clearly, this is the biggest barrier. And can we consider democratizing treatment, driving access by actually reducing cost? One of the other particularly important issues was parts of the couple and for the timing was a barrier. Worries about the emotional strain. There are very few happy stories about IVF experiences. Most people find it stressful. Most people find it difficult. And then also, sometimes one of the members of the couple might be determined to try naturally and might be quite reluctant to medicalize the situation and attend a clinic. So all of these will make it more difficult. It will produce more barriers. But the bottom line finding from the study was its cost. It's the financial investment that you need to make that holds most people back and forms the biggest barrier to treatment. That was the international story. Let's look at the UK. Well, interestingly, in the UK, cost was still the most significant issue. And I feel that that's an awful situation for the UK, where we have an NHS that should provide healthcare needs for the whole population. I mean, if somebody was having a heart attack and going into treatment for a heart attack, you wouldn't think that the costs would be one of the barriers that they would experience to going and getting treatment. Well, infertility is a disease. So why should our fertility patients all of a sudden have to take this issue on about cost when all of their other healthcare needs can be met by the NHS? So it's very sad that even in the UK, that 31% of respondents, cost was the main barrier. The second biggest one in the UK was this issue about the patient and the partner not being on the same page, either in terms of time or in terms of whether they wish to medicalize this. And this is a really difficult one, because I think going through this without the full support of your partner, it adds to stress. And who knows whether that has any implications on the outcome. It certainly has implications on the number of times that you'll go through treatment, which clearly can affect the chance of success and ultimately getting to that desired outcome. So you'll see that although cost is important, many of the other issues are emotional. They're relationship-based. And I don't think that the providers of treatment, like fertility clinics, think about enough what is the patient, her partner, and what is the relationship going through when they come through IVF treatment. And you can see from the data just what an important issue is and how it's a real barrier to our UK patients receiving treatment. So we've mentioned that these sorts of treatments can be stressful. It can disrupt your life. It can take over your life. And I think only recently have clinics taken seriously the experience that patients are having and the impact on their mental health. I mean, this is a study showing that the patients do feel that mental health is an important issue. You can see that actually clinics were offering support for mental health issues far less than patients are actually experiencing those challenges. Interestingly, only a much smaller number of patients actually sought treatment. And this is true across most countries. And I think this impact of mental health, I mean, look, China, nearly 80% of patients were suffering from mental health and they thought it was negatively affected. And in the UK, it's over 60%. So this is a big deal. everybody involved in how we provide services needs to understand this. We need to start changing the way we design services to reduce this burden on patients' mental health, because this is not a good experience. And it makes people drop out of treatment when, in fact, if we'd have looked after their mental health and made it a better experience, they might have stuck with treatment and they might have ended up with that good outcome. You can see that the burden of mental health is mainly on the patients themselves who come through. And in fertility treatments, the majority of these patients will be women. But in partners, they will also experience impacts on their mental health. Sometimes it will be because the subfertility may be based on a couple issue. Other times, the member of the couple who's the partner rather than the patient, medically everything might be fine, but still seeing your partner going through a very difficult time. And again, I think this just needs to emphasize that fertility treatment is usually a couple-focused treatment. So it's very difficult to carry on with treatment when you feel that it's affecting you emotionally and mentally in such an important way. And perhaps it's not surprising that this has a huge impact on relationships. And you know, there'll be some couples where actually there could be some positive impacts in terms of focusing them on a shared goal, but actually many couples, it'll have a negative impact on the relationship, both with the partner and sometimes with the family as well. It can have a negative impact sexually. Couples can feel isolated from each other and they can feel a strain. Interestingly, you can see that in some couples, it actually can bring them closer together. But this is unfortunately not the case in the majority of situations. Okay, so can we put this all together? What does it mean? So the most important finding from this study is that it takes a lot longer for couples to come through the system, both in terms of the length of time trying naturally, thinking about treatment and then getting treatment. There are very significant time delays. And I think we're obliged to look at this and to try and design our pathways to allow patients and couples to get through this much easier and much quicker. There is a high level of concurrence, fortunately, between the patient and partner subgroups and the drivers to seek treatment. So this means if you can get your relationships and your goals all on the same page, it's very likely that you'll move quicker through the system. That motivational coherence and mutual support seems to be a key driver. Very interestingly, whether couples stay in a system is very much determined by their relationship with the healthcare provider. Because if you feel you're in a clinic where actually the staff just don't get it and they don't care in the way they should, you're far more likely to either move clinics or terminate treatment completely. So we as healthcare providers need to be aware of the important role our relationship with the patient plays in terms of whether they continue on that journey. There is no getting away from cost. Cost is the major barrier, even in a country like the UK, where there's quite significant NHS funding. So all of us need to take part, I think, in that wider picture of not just treating patients, but of supporting the agenda for more people to be able to access treatment, hopefully through the NHS, like all other healthcare is in the UK. There's no doubt that this can be a very significant emotional strain, and this does vary between patient and partner, and it varies at different times of the treatment cycle. So if we are going
Sorry, once again, another take.
and then,
oh, you're back again, Stuart. We kind of lost you there for a second.
oh, sorry, thank you. Not all couples are actually accessing that mental health support, even if it's available. So the couples are coming through this to be mums and dads. And if you end up coming out of treatment with a negative impact on your relationship, then we're doing something wrong, and we need to address that. So in our clinic, we've all sat down and said, well, what does this mean? What are the things we need to understand when we're trying to care for patients? So there's this appreciation and understanding of the time sensitivity, There's the cost barrier. I work in both the NHS sector and the private sector. Treatments are not cheap. They're very, very expensive, and sometimes they're out of reach of patients and couples. We need to have a supportive relationship between the clinic and the patient and or the couple. And we need to understand and address that unmet need for support with mental health. So we need to change during the treatment journey. We need to involve the partner more, and we need to understand the impact on people's lives so that actually we place the patient at the center of treatment and not what's easy for the clinic. So we need to focus on human interaction for support. I think that no amount of AI, no amount of apps are going to be able to give that emotional and mental support like a human being can. I think there's something about that person-to-person relationship that provides the best level of emotional and mental health support. That relationship's got to be continuous, and it's got to be agile to the different stages of the patient journey when these it's got to be more patient friendly. We've got to start on patients bring a lot of issues to the consultation that they want to talk through, lots of questions, and we've got to allow that to happen. And then ultimately, there's a lot of science in our field, there's a lot of technology, but we've got to be able to strike a balance between the technology and science and the human experience. So we've started a nurse coaching program, and we've done this to try and bring the human element into supportive care. We believe that there's already a relationship between many patients
Apologies once again, everyone, for the interruption. I think we seem to have lost Stuart. Oh, he's back again. That seems like quite an unstable connection you've got there, Stuart.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. Are we still on now?
Yep.
Okay.
I've lost your slides off the screen.
Okay, that was the last slide.
Okay, I think everybody probably had the opportunity to read through those slides, and if you have any questions, then just pop them in the Q&A. I have got a number of questions that patients that couldn't make the event today have sent in advance. So what I'll do is I'll go through my questions, and that gives anyone else an opportunity to actually think anything that I haven't covered. But one of the questions that I have out with the questions I've already got is the stark difference in time to treatment between the UK and China. And I know even China's 32 months is unacceptable, but what is it they're doing in China that, you know, that they're 8 months ahead of the UK? I think people probably would be surprised to see, you know, China are so far ahead of us in terms of time to treatment.
Yeah, I think this is probably the most outstanding finding of the study, is the length of time that it actually takes to get through it all. And I think there's probably a number of reasons. I think many of them are this desire to try and do it naturally, because, you know, let's be honest, it's much more fun and it's a lot cheaper doing this naturally than it is going to a clinic. And so it is appropriate that a clinic should be your last resort and not your first resort. You know, your first option shouldn't be to medicalize it. But I think it's having that couple thinking the same things. And all too often, I see sometimes frustration in the consulting room where one member of the couple is desperate to get treatment started, and the other member of the couple says, oh no, I think we should just give it a little bit more time. So those sort of relationships, shared goals, shared agendas, shared ventures are absolutely critical, and we need to understand that. And I think couples are acutely aware of that. I don't think we need to tell them. But this study actually is very good to feed into the sector, so that the sector has now good evidence to work on. It is interesting about China and why they can get to treatment much quicker. It's fascinating, and particularly because all treatment in China is private. It's not state subsidized, which one might have assumed for a communist country. So actually, the reason the Chinese get there much quicker is not because they're not faced with costs. They're faced with very real costs. And so it's interesting to understand the psychology about that. And I just think we need to do what we can so that when couples do decide, we make that treatment pathway much quicker. And there's a lot to do about referral patterns. There's a lot to do about clinics repeating unnecessary tests where the GP's done them already. There's a little bit to do with sometimes primary referrers and GPs taking patients seriously and not fobbing them off and saying, go away and try for another 6 months before you come back. I think listening to people is absolutely critical. And I think if we listen to people, we'll make the journey quicker.
So have we done some analysis in the UK to look at where that journey, like where the different units of time are taken up, to see where we can actually try and unblock that delay in a patient's pathway?
No, there's no national data on this at all. So the only thing that you will have is waiting times for NHS IVF clinics. That's the only data there is. And they're really hard because they don't reflect how long it took the couple to get into the GP. They don't reflect how long the couple were at the GP doing some primary care tests. So the only reliable statistic is the time from referral to the time that you're seen for treatment. Now that used to be government priority, okay? When that was initially brought in more than 8 or 9 years ago, that was reduced to a maximum of 18 weeks. And that had a massive impact on IVF provision on the NHS because clinics were no longer allowed to wait 2 years to treat patients. They had to do it within 18 weeks. But unfortunately, because of other pressures on the healthcare system, that 18-week wait for IVF treatment has gone down the list of priorities. And in many centers, and particularly in the post-COVID setting, that 18-week limit on pathway, it does no longer have focus or priority.
That's unfortunate, but I suppose that's the world we're living in at this moment in time. So if I go to one of the questions, it's probably unsurprising that cost is the biggest barrier to treatment. And recently we have seen some areas moving closer to the 3 cycles recommended by NICE when they carry out proper consultation. Are you hopeful that more areas will follow and move to the NICE guidelines?
It's a very difficult question to answer. I would say in general, I'm worried. I'm worried that in a tightening healthcare budget post-COVID, that fertility services can be seen as a soft target, and that actually of all services that are cut, fertility might be one of the first ones to be cut. And so I was actually thrilled when North Central London actually said, no, hang on a minute, we're going to buck that trend and we're going to fund 3 cycles and fully implement the NICE guidelines. So, you know, I'm delighted that my pessimism might have been misplaced. And actually there are health authorities and CCGs out there that have compassion to understand the healthcare need for infertile couples and patients. So I think that's an amazing step that North Central London across all their CCGs have taken to fund. And I just hope and pray that other CCGs will look at this and potentially follow suit. I really hope so.
Yeah, and I probably, the charity probably feels the same. You know, fertility waiting lists don't hit national news the same way that accident emergency wait times do. And health boards are faced with that whole, you know, targets, you know, yeah, it is really concerning. I'm hoping that, you know, with the Middlesex survey, the Fertility Network commissioned that was just, you know, released this week, that some of the major health implications in relation to patients' mental health will actually support keeping, you know, fertility services actually ahead of, you know, where they are just now, and for them to continue to move towards the recommended NICE guidelines. That perhaps is wishful thinking on behalf of the Fertility Network, on behalf of our patients, but it's something we will keep pushing anytime we get the opportunity to speak with people in positions in the CCGs and in governments.
Yeah,
Yeah, on you go, Stuart.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, one of the good things is that we actually have the nice guidance, which is the evidence-based, that what sustainable and good fertility treatment is all about. So I'm delighted that we have that goal to aim at. And I share your aspiration that more CCGs will go along with that.
Yeah, brilliant. Another key barrier to treatment was that sometimes partners were not equally keen to have a child by any means necessary. Is that something you see in your clinics?
Yeah, I see it quite frequently, and it's hard. It really is hard. Where one member of the couple is hurting and wants to get on with things and wants to start, and the other member of the couple maybe have more faith in nature and the old-fashioned way of happening. And you can't really do this alone if you're in a couple. You really do need the support. There isn't anything more that's really such a joint venture. And it's hard that, we're actually having those conversations in the clinic. And of course, many people that are having these conversations in the privacy of their own home are not even getting to the clinic because perhaps both members of the couples are not being supportive. And it's very hard as a doctor to give advice on communication and relationships because it's not our area of expertise, but it's a critical area that I think is a barrier of people accessing treatment in a prompt way.
And it's difficult to actually even understand how you actually help couples that are facing that particular issue. So
yeah, there's no tablet for that. There's no tablet for me looking in the relationship and trying to look at those shared goals and being on that shared journey. It's not an area that you can medicalize, but it's a critical area.
One key area to come out was our concern in relation to the mental health, and that was reflected in our survey. And it's really given a really bleak picture of mental health of patients going through fertility treatment. Is this something clinics need to think more about, how we can actually support patients with their mental health?
So I think this is on the agenda now. And in many ways, it's actually thanks to the regulator, the HFEA, for putting it on the agenda and making it a focus. And I think clinics do need to be aware of this, that we need to think about the medical treatment in the context of a human being or two human beings undergoing treatment. And whilst the last 25 years has taught us to be very, very good at, testing hormone levels and doing ultrasounds and mixing eggs and sperm together in the lab, we haven't devoted enough time to the mental health of people coming through. And I think it's absolutely critical that, if you're looking after a couple or a patient in a holistic way, you would be absolutely remiss. And I think the regulator is shining a spotlight on this. What worries me about this survey is really how big the mental health issue is for patients and how few times clinics actually offer mental health support. And then even the number of times where patients actually access it, even when that support is there. So I think it's an important issue. And I think, whether you're an NHS provider or a private provider, I don't think you can ignore this because I think it's all about making the patient experience better so that they hang in there and you allow them to complete the journey by giving them support.
Yeah, I would 100% agree with you. And I think, is it just about more counselling, or should all clinic staff be more aware of this and more involved in it?
So Sharon, I think that's what it is. So I think the counselling to a degree is already there. Okay, and the counselling is very good for often the very big serious issues, such as if I'm using a donor medico-legally, what do I understand? And so the counselling has a critical role that all clinics have to provide that. But I don't think the counselling is enough because the counsellor is not there at every step of the journey. And that's why in our own clinic, where we've chosen to address this is with the nurses, because the nurses are there at every step of the journey. And what we're trying to do is empower our nurses, not only to be great fertility nurses, but actually to be fertility coaches, so that each step of the journey, they recognize the mental health issues and the emotional challenges that couples are going through. And being that first point, that relationship is built up. My hope is by empowering the nurses to become fertility coaches, we allow that support to actually take place through the whole journey. Because I'm worried the counseling, who are fantastic, and we couldn't do our job without them, I'm worried they don't have enough interaction points with the patients along the way in the same way that the nurses do.
Okay. We know at our charity how helpful peer support can be to patients while they're on a fertility journey. However, from the people that we work with, most patients find our charity through Google rather than through their clinics. Do you think more needs to be done to ensure clinics use the support of Fertility Network that we can provide in bringing those patient peer support groups together? Because that's one of the things that Fertility Network has really developed over lockdown, moving away from the old format of patient support groups. We now have got so many different support groups that support patients based on their journey, based on what their starting point is, whether it's older women's group, black women's group, men only group. And these groups have proven to be really, really successful and something that patients want. But what we need to do, and this is what we're asking you, is do you think clinics need to do more to involve Fertility Network in that?
I think we need to improve our partnership. I really do, because I think both the charity and the clinics have such a critical role to play in helping patients along that journey. And I don't think our partnership is where it should be. I think we should improve that relationship, because when patients find that they're not alone, that they do have peers out there that have the same worries, the same concerns, and the same questions, and that relationship with a peer is much easier to establish. Sometimes the relationship between a patient and doctor can come loaded with all sorts of issues where patients might be afraid to ask questions. They might be afraid that their question is silly in some way. But actually, when you're there with people just like you who are going through the same thing, I think that has huge merit and has huge value. And I don't think clinics recognize that enough. And I think we do need to improve that partnership for the benefit of our mutual patients.
Yeah, thank you. Another key finding is around the impact on relationships. And again, this was something highlighted in our survey this week. Should we be doing something, and I mean both clinics and Fertility Network, to prepare people on a fertility journey before they even start that fertility journey? Is there more we could do to actually prepare them about the challenges they will face, both emotionally and physically?
I certainly think we can do things about heightening awareness. I think that's pretty simple. It's pretty straightforward, and I think you can probably do that in a relatively informal manner. Talking about the importance of supporting each other. What's really hard is to then influence things. When people are outside the clinic and they're at home, and perhaps sometimes things are dawning on them, and when they're reflecting, and it can be a lonely place. So I think the role of clinics is certainly to raise awareness that the relationship is going to come under stress, and that couples should start to think about things that they can do. And my hope is that there is a rise in sort of a fertility coaching movement with the counsellors that actually might give people tools and strategies to deal with this sort of thing. And this is kind of outside the remit of the usual fertility doctor and the usual fertility nurse. It's actually a reasonably expert area, but I think we all need to become better acquainted with it, because anybody who's in touch with patients, who's looking after patients, sometimes there's small things that you can do in this area that can have a hugely positive impact. And
you talked earlier about the nurse coaching programme that you're working in. Is this something any other clinics are actually doing, or is this going to be
not that I'm aware? We think it's a bit new. We think it's a bit novel, but we think it's a great idea. So what we're going to do is we're going to implement it, and as I said, we're going to do it as an academic exercise and provide some evidence of whether it works or not. But my instinct is I think this is going to bring some real value, and we would be delighted to share that experience with other clinics, because I think this is something that every clinic and every patient can benefit from, and hopefully we can provide some solid data and some science to actually back it up. So I'm really excited about it, because it is new, it is novel, and it's thinking about the patient and the patient journey, and I just think that attitude is something that we need to make more prevalent.
Thanks, Stuart. So I've got a couple of questions here in the Q&A. The first one, is there a way that a person can obtain fertility treatment before getting on board with IVF? Are there any other less invasive treatments that can be considered while they're still trying naturally?
There are loads of things that you can do. Don't think about accessing medical advice equals booking into your IVF cycle next week. Okay, there are an enormous amount of things that providers can help with in terms of basic advice, things about timing of intercourse and frequency of intercourse, things about nutrition and getting yourself as healthy as possible. So all of those things can be really valuable. So yes, there's a huge amount of information that's directly helpful to you that's available to access. And it doesn't, don't think I'm going to approach a doctor for some advice and some help. Oh my God, I'm going to be pushed into IVF. That should not be the situation at all. There's so much more to this in helping people get pregnant naturally, maximizing their chances of doing it naturally. And then even if it does have to become medicalized, there are other gentler treatments before you necessarily need to access IVF.
Thank you. Another question: with the public health seeming to lead in the women's health strategy implementation at a local level, how do you see local public health leads integrating with the new ICS structures in order to ensure the strategy have been implemented? As an organisation, how can we best support this strategy being driven at a local level with regards to fertility?
Okay, so the first thing to say is it's great that we've got a strategy. Okay, I mean, you think, but as well to help us drive that supporting approach. The question is good though, because how do you move from a government strategy with amazingly high profile ambassadors to something happening in your block, on your street, in your hospital? And I think that's the challenge here. So it's great having it on the agenda. It's great that everybody's talking about it, but how do you actually make it make a difference at a local level? And I think the CCGs probably have a big role to play here, because the CCGs are the ones whose hands are on the purse strings in terms of saying, can you release funds at a local level to be devoted towards this? And if you can, the other thing I think that needs a lot of attention on the ground is the relationship with the primary care GPs and the fertility clinics, because I just feel if we improved on that relationship, we could make that journey much better. We could reduce the number of unnecessary, expensive, unpleasant duplications if we made the language between the GPs and the clinics better. And that can be things like, just trying to be on the same IT system and joined up. So I think we're making a start on this because of the strategy, but you're absolutely right. Whoever asked the question, the challenge is achieving it at local level. And my view would be, get the GPs on board with the clinics to make the life easier for the patients and the journey quicker for the patients. Okay,
thank you. I've got one more question, but if anybody's got a burning question they want to ask before we just finish up, pop it in the Q&A. Someone's asked if really useful to be watch this recording, and can we share the link where the video will be updated to? The video will be put on Fertility Network's website, and it will be under a webinar page, and it'll be highlighted what this one is. And somebody asked if we could get an email notification when this is available. I will speak to our organisers to see if we can email everyone that attended the group to actually send you that link as well. If there's no more questions, I would really like to thank Stuart for the time. I know it's really precious, and I want to thank everybody that's actually tuned in. I'm sorry about some of the technical difficulties that we had today, but that's the world of working and living in an IT world. And finally, as I mentioned earlier, Fertility Network have got so many support groups, that are peer support groups. Please look on our website. Please join us on social media. We promote when all of those support groups are gone. All of the ones that are on social media are in closed forums, so no one else that's in your friend group on whether it's Facebook or Instagram or WhatsApp will be able to see that you're part of that group. Please come and join your peers. There's some really good discussions going on. And finally, Fertility Network as a charity, we rely heavily on donations from people that have worked with us. So please, if you can, text donate at FNUK with the amount, whether it's £5, £10, whatever, to 70085. That would be much appreciated. But my name's Sharon Martin. You will get my details at sharon@fertilitynetwork.org. If you've got any questions that perhaps you didn't even want to ask today, please drop me a line and I can get Stuart to answer those questions offline. Thanks again, Stuart, for coming along. It's been really, really useful. And thanks to Ferring for sponsoring the event. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.